Hey guys, so I ended up going ahead and, like I said, it was Vanguard week, and I wanted to make a how to play Vanguard video as my first video for you guys to enjoy. And I really believe that this is a fun game to play. So what is really cool about this game is its luck mechanic, basically, which is it revolves around trigger units, which I'll end up getting to in just a bit, but I want you guys to know what these basic rules are. So the game is comprised of 6 zones. So the main one in your main circle, which will be this one, is actually called the Vanguard. This is your main character. This is what you are. So this is your character. You go out of your way to go ahead and evolve you to try and make sure all your other units evolve. Now there's a lot of different ways to do that, and mainly the best way is by writing. So every turn you take a grade, which is this right here. You go ahead and you write on top of it as long as it's 1 higher or 1 equal. And the reason I'm saying 1 equal is because if you have 2 3s, 1 in hand, and then 1 already on the field, you can ride a 3 onto it and still gain the imaginary gift, which again we will be getting into. So why do I have these units right here to display this? So first off, you always want to have a starter. Every deck has a starter. In the standard variation, it's normally when wrote upon, draw 1 card. And the really cool part about this is, it's always a grade 0, so you always start with it. In the premium format, which I'm not going to be getting into today, there are other ones that like move themselves from the drop zone, or move themselves from the soul onto the field, or some other nutty effects. But the reason that they changed standard and premium is because the game basically got too unbalanced. Then it goes grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. There are grade 4s and grade 5s. There's only 1 grade 5 in the game. You cannot ride into it. But then there's also the trigger unit. Now, let's go over the beginning and how to start the game before I get into the trigger unit. So, at the start of the game, you shuffle your deck, choose 1 grade 0, and put it face down, right? In your Vanguard zone. This is going to be your starter unit. This is going to be your initial Vanguard. And what you do is you shuffle your deck, you present it to your opponent, and then you draw 5 cards off of the top of your deck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it's recommended that you have a 1, a 2, and a 3 in hand so that you can go into your sequences. However, if you don't get one of those pieces, it's fine. It's not as fine, but it's okay. So I have a bunch of these trigger units, which are units with these little symbols in the corner, where I'm actually going to go ahead and at the beginning of the game, you can always choose to mulligan any number of cards back into your deck. So you put them to the bottom of the deck, and then you draw that many. So I'm going to draw 3. So we got 1, we got 2, and we got 3. So now, as you can tell, I've got a 3, a 2, and a 1. Now this is really important because this is how you're going to be able to ride up. So this deck that I'm playing is all about just like beefing your monsters up and for one big final swing. It's really fun to play, but it's not that really good as a deck. So at the beginning of the game, once you mulligan, you shuffle or present it to your opponent, and then you set it down. The winner of the dice roll always goes first. It's randomly chosen. You don't get to pick who goes first. So then what you do is you stand up the Vanguard, you reveal what deck you're playing, and the way that you reveal what deck you're playing is down here on the bottom. This one says Royal Paladin. There's Dark Irregular, Narukami, Nabutama. I could go off of all the 20 different clans, but basically the clan that you're playing is basically your deck design. So since there's only 20 different decks, they have different variations of the deck design. Oracle Think Tank is all about like scrying from the top of the deck, looking at the top of the deck and choosing whether or not it's going to go to the top or bottom of the deck. There's Dark Irregular, which is all about just building your soul. It's all about just like throwing as many of the same monsters into one zone and just trying to beef up your Vanguard. And I'll get into the soul in just a bit. And then the one of the best ones for Excel is Narukami. Narukami is all about like banishing your opponent's board and then utilizing that your opponent's empty board as its own win condition, basically. So for going first, you draw a card for your turn, you ride a grade higher. Sometimes you don't have the grade higher, but normally you do. And then the cool part about this game is you don't have chain links. It's one after the another. So if this one had an on-ride effect, I could go chain link, or you don't even have to do chain links. You just do, I'm going to resolve Glide first, and then I'm going to resolve this. You don't have to worry about, because both trigger effects, they happen at separate times. And it's really cool because you can have cards that have costs, and then later down the road, even though you had the ability to activate the ability, but you didn't have the place or the piece in the graveyard, now you do, and it now like goes really far. And it's really cool in the deck. Another interesting thing is, gosh, I can't remember. Okay, anyway, so you ride up, and then because of Gline's ability, you draw one, and normally, depending on what turn you're playing, if you're going second, you attack. If you're going first, normally you just pass on this. One monster is fine because you want to take damage. Now, how do we take damage in the game? So let's say my opponent also has an Allen. So let's say he rides into it and then swings with his Allen. You tap your monster to swing. Now, the only way to take damage in the game is if they do damage to the Vanguard. And the only way that you can do damage if it's equal or higher attack than your opponent. So if this, since it's 8,000 and this is 8,000, if this hits this, which is the term that they use, if it hits it, you will take damage. If it's a rear guard, which you can only attack the front rear guards unless otherwise said, you can only attack the front rear guards, as well as the only units that can attack is the front row. If my Allen, right, hit this one, what you do is you do a damage check, right? So you take the top card of your deck, you put it in the trigger zone or damage zone, and you check to see if it has one of these symbols. Normally, if it does, you add the damage on here and apply any other effects on the card. Now, when you attack with your Vanguard, you don't do this with any of your rear guards unless otherwise stated, okay? If you attack with your Vanguard, you do what's called a drive check. For grades 0, 1, and 2, you get 1 drive check. For grades 3, you get 2 drive checks, and you can tell by the symbol that's right here. It says twin drive. So I'm going to do my drive check. This still hits because it's 8 to 8, and then they do a damage check. So I actually hit a trigger. This is the critical trigger. The critical means the damage that it does. So as you can tell on the bottom of this card, it's kind of hard to tell, but as you can tell at the bottom of this card right here, let's get that into focus there, it says 1 critical. So with the critical trigger, it ends up adding an extra damage on there. So instead of your opponent checking 1 damage, they check 2. At 6 damage, you lose the game. That's pretty much it. There are other cards that end up giving extra critical or extra power, but we're going to go and move past that. Now let's say my Vanguard checked the trigger, and I had a unit right here, right? So we are going to put the Vanguard checking the trigger. Now the cool part about a trigger, right, at least in standard, or well, at least in the game, is you can use multiple effects and divide them between different cards. So this one's, as I'm going to show you right now, right there, it says plus 10,000 and critical. So you can actually choose to give the plus 10,000 to another unit. So let's say my opponent did not guard with a card in their hand or on the board, and it still does damage. When I do my drive check, because you have to guard before I do my drive check, when I do my drive check, I can give the critical to my Vanguard and the power to my unit, so that if they drive or damage check this, and they gain the power, at least I can still hit their unit with my rear guard unit. Now the interesting part about this is when they damage check, they still apply all effects of the trigger to any unit. So let's say that you want to go ahead and give the power to your Vanguard and then hit another trigger later down the road and give the power to the rear guard. That's perfectly fine. The criticals don't matter during the opponent's turn, or during your opponent's turn if you're being damage checked, but that's less of a problem. Now, let's go over the triggers. So we have this, this, this. These are the ones that I have in this deck. And then there's one more trigger to go off of. So there are 4 triggers in the game. There is the front trigger. So front trigger, as a skill, it says plus 10,000, but it says front. So every unit in the front row gains plus 10. We have the draw trigger. This one's pretty obvious. You give plus 10 to any unit and draw 1 card. This one's also a sentinel, which we'll get to in a second. The heal trigger, which is a really interesting effect. If you have you can only have up to 4 heal units into the deck. However, it also has another cool skill where if you have damage equal to or greater than your opponent's damage, you heal 1 card. You take 1 card from your damage and put it into the drop zone. And then the critical trigger, which I had just explained, gives an extra damage, and you can also manipulate the power. So that's a really interesting part of this game. Now, let's say that all I drew was grades 1s and 2s, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And we had ridden all the way up to our grade 2 unit. And we draw for our turn, and all we draw is a grade 2 or lower. Now, the weird part about this game is obviously being grade stuck completely ruins how the game is played, as imaginary gifts are going to be very important. But I'm going to get to that in just a second. You can actually do what's called a Gassist. So let's say you're at grade 2. You can reveal your hand to your opponent to prove that you don't have the ability to ride up. You have to have the ability to ride up to check. And if you have a grade 3 unit, you can do a Gassist. Now, you check the top 5 cards of your deck. You don't have to show them to your opponent, but you check them. And you check to see if there's a grade 3 unit in there. So let's say this and then these 4 were in there. So we take the grade 3, add it to our hand, then take 2 cards in our hand, remove them from the game. They are not being removed from play. They are not being bound. They are completely being removed from play. And then you ride the grade that you just put into the hand. Now the important part about this is you also go ahead and shuffle your deck because you just looked at the top 5 cards of your deck. But that's really interesting in regards to the game because it lets you be able to fix the stuck mechanic where a lot of games have. Magic the Gathering has mana stuck. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has bricking. In this game, though you do have what's called a grade stick, you can go and fix that by Gassisting, and it's really important. Now, we're going to go off of the icons on what's on the cards. So the grade 1s, the grade 2s, and the grade 3s are completely different. So let's go over the icons on this to show you what you can do. So our grade 0s and grade 1s have the boost icon right there. I'm also going to show it with the grade 1 here. Boost icon. Now that means if it is in the back row and you attack with a unit, you can boost it by applying the current power of that unit onto your Vanguard, and onto the unit that it's boosting. And it has to be in the same column unless otherwise stated by card effects. Now what's really cool about that is it is the current power applied, which means you can apply more power to it earlier in the game, and then when you go into your battle phase, you swing with it, and then it gains the power onto the Vanguard, and that Vanguard keeps that power until the end of the battle. Now, we have the grade 2 unit, which has Intercept. Now, Intercept is actually really important. If it's in the front row, unless otherwise stated by card effects, you can guard with this in the front row as a unit, as if you were guarding from your hand. And it's really good because they do normally have between 5 to 10 shield, or more depending on card effects, obviously. And then finally, the grade 3 unit, which has 2 special symbols. Not every grade 3 has this symbol, but it does have this one normally. Now the grade 3 right here has Twin Drive, which means you take 2 cards for your drive check instead of 1. And then this has Force. Now, in the introduction to Standard, they provided the imaginary gifts. There's Protect, there's Excel, and there's Force. Now, Force goes on to any unit of your choice, and it gains 10,000 until the end of your turn. It's really good because it lets you have your units gain more power, and the design for Force decks is to put as much power and just hit your opponent in the face as fast as possible. Excel decks gives 1 unit 10,000 and opens up another front row for you to attack a unit with. The important part about Excel decks is they may have low or small numbers, but they can attack with multiple numbers at a time. And it's really good because then you don't have to worry about, your opponent end up being, or you having too little monsters or too small of monsters. Though Force is about building your opponent, your field as much as possible, Excel is about just building your board and then swinging at them with as many units as possible. And then on top of that, Excel decks are the only decks that have the front marker, which means they're the only ones that have the ability to build up these bigger monsters very quickly. And then finally, my favorite one is Protect. Now, Protect is basically exactly what it sounds like. They're more Sentinels. Now, Sentinels are actually really interesting in the game. Normally, you can only run 4 in the deck, which I had shown before. The Draw PG, which is what people call it, it's a perfect guard. As you can see, it does have the draw, but there's something special about this right here. It has 0, unlike normal shield value, which is anywhere between 5 to 10 to 20k, depending on what is in the card. But it does have this special effect. Sentinel. You may only have up to 4 cards with Sentinel in a deck. When placed on the Guardian Circle, as you can tell in that little G right there, discard a card from your hand, and one of your units cannot be hit until the end of that current battle. Now the cool part about that is if your Vanguard is being hit or attacked by an opponent's Vanguard, you can use this, discard a card from your hand, and now your opponent cannot hit that Vanguard for the rest of that battle. It's really important in this deck, as now you have the ability to protect your units without having to guard an excessive amount. Now, what is guarding that some of you may be asking? Guarding is using units with a shield value to try and overbeat the opponent in regards to their power and damage that they're going to do to your Vanguard. Now, as you can tell, this line has 6,000 attack, but it has a 10,000 shield. So how do you guard? When your opponent declares an attack onto your Vanguard, so let's say this is my Vanguard, and my opponent goes ahead and taps, declaring an attack onto my Vanguard. Now, this has 1,300 attack. So, what it would do is if it hit this, it would deal damage to me. And remember, when you hit 6 damage, you lose the game. Now, what you can do is you can take this right here, so you can tell by these little shield values right here, 5, 10, and 20, that you can use these. When your opponent declares a battle and has not drive checked yet, you can choose not to guard, but by guarding, you can make sure that it survives. So this is 13, and this is 6. So another 6 would make it 12, another 7 would make it 13. So we need to get over 7 before he drive checks. So let's take this 10 right here. So now it's 16. Well, if he hits one trigger and gives this the 10, well, then that means this would end up being broke. The shield would get broken, your Vanguard would get hit. So now that this is 1 to pass, you can make it 2 to pass by using a 10 or a 15 shield. So right now, since this is 16, we need something that would make it over 23. So anything between 15 and 20 shield would make it more. So this right here is 20 shield onto your 26. That means he has to hit 2 triggers to pass this guard. Now do remember, these guardings normally can only be used from your hand. However, with intercepts, you can use it with zones from your front row or with other cards, depending on what your card effects do. Also, during the guarding phase, you can also use your perfect guards to guard your Vanguard, triggering its skill in the Guardian step to try and protect your Vanguard skill. Now, what we're going to do is I am going to go ahead and explain the card effect symbols that is necessary in the game. Now, first off is the Soul Blast. Then there is the Counter Blast. Then there is the Soul Charge. I don't think there's any counter charging in this deck. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to reach into my Dark Irregulars deck here. I'm going to show you counter charging. So first off, counter blasting and counter charging. So what is the damage doing for you? As you can see right here, this says C charge 1, and then this says C blast 1. So when you take damage every turn, or if you do take damage, they're going to be applied to this zone over here, face up. Once you get to 6, you lose. However, you can use these zones to your whim to gain effects. Now, counterblasting is when you take one of the face-up damage that you have taken, put it face down, and apply the effect. So, this one specifically says, when placed, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the front row and retire it. That's sending it to the graveyard. So it targets and then sends it to the graveyard. So, what is Soul Blasting? So, as you can tell, with this unit right here, we have, when you're riding over a unit, you keep all units under it under that. And it's kind of like Yu-Gi-Oh's Xyz materials, but it gains effects based off of your soul count. Now, with this skill, let's say we have taken 1 damage, which would be possible if you're on your grade 2, and you've ridden twice. So, when you ride into this, you activate the skill. Soul Blast. So you take a unit from your soul, put it into your graveyard, Counter Blast, take a damage that's face up, put it face down, and then apply effect. The things in the little cost symbol, as you can tell right here, there, as it says right there, it says, come on, focus. There we go. Cost, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1. Anything in that parentheses is the cost. So, now let's get to our soul charging. We have just used our Blaster Blade to Soul Blast 1, Counterblast 1. Now we need to soul charge because this is a deck that uses soul charging. So you take this. This says, if this is in the same, when placed, if you have another unit in the same column as this unit, counter charge or soul charge 1, and if the soul charge is a trigger unit, you get plus 5,000 until the end of the turn. So we're going to place this in the same column that this unit is in. It's going to activate the skill, take the top card of your deck, right? Take the top card of your deck and you put it in the soul, and then you apply any other effects afterwards. So this would gain 5,000 because you hit a trigger in it. And now, Soul Blasting. So, Soul Blasting, as I had explained, or sorry, Countercharging. That's what I needed to explain. Countercharging is the total opposite of Counterblasting. You take a face down damage and flip it face up. So I'm going to read Killer Tail right here. It's going to be a little bit of a word, or a little bit of a paragraph, but it definitely explains what it does. Rest this unit and put a card from your damage zone or drop zone into your soul. I just explained what the soul was. And if you put from your damage zone, put the top card of your deck into the damage zone face down. If your soul has 3 of this card's name in it, soul charge 1 and stand this unit. That's saying, if I put something from my damage that was face down into my soul, all right, I rest it first, damage into soul, and then if I have 3 of this in the same name, I put the top card face down, and if we have 3 of the same name of this card in my soul, I countercharge 1, and then I restand the unit. That's pretty much it. That is pretty much how the game is played. Other card effects do end up being utilized different ways, but I would love to go ahead and show you more. Now, with this deck, it is completely based around soul charging. So I'm actually going to do a test game showing off what this deck is capable of and how fun this game is. Now, as I explained, you do want to take damage, and I'm going to simulate based off of what the games I've played recently to explain how much damage you normally do take. So we put our Vanguard face down. We take 5 cards from the top of our deck, obviously shuffled and cut. We look at them. So as you can see here, I do not have a grade 3, but that's fine. I have 2 turns to get into it. We're actually going to take this grade 0 right here, and this grade 2. You actually don't need this yet, and I'm going to put them to the bottom of the deck, and I'm going to draw 2. So I don't need the Sakane, and the heal trigger is never good to see. However, the good part about it is 20,000 defense that I can use later down the road. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shuffle my deck, and I'm going to say I'm going first, just to play out what it would be like if I went first. So I'm going to say my opponent doesn't have any critical triggers for this entire game, just applying 1 or 2 damage based off of what I have experienced, facing no criticals. However, if there are criticals in the game, this does change how this play would go. So I want to keep the Pongal here in my hand until later, because I do want to go ahead and utilize its skill. So we're actually going to draw for our turn. We have a grade 3. That's not bad, but it's not the one that we're looking for. We ride, because you draw for your turn, then it's your ride phase, and then activate any skills that activate as a trigger during the ride phase. So since this was rode upon, you draw 1 card, and then this would activate, but I don't have any counterblast. This, when placed from hand, counterblast 1, special summon 1 unit from my hand, and then draw a card. It's really interesting later down the road, but right now it's not needed. So this would draw me 1 card, and now you actually don't want to do anything, because if you play any extra cards and the opponent has cards that utilize the ability to remove them from the board, you don't have a way to go and push through that. So instead, you just pass. Now, when the opponent goes for their first grade 1, they're going to swing at you once. Normally, sometimes they do 2, but I'm just going to do once. So we do our damage check. So that's 1 damage. Now we're going to draw. We have a Blaster Blade. Now this is really good. So you ride your Blaster Blade. Now this guy is really cool. You can place her. When she's placed, I counterblast 1. I take a Pongle from my deck and place it to a rearguard circle. It also gains another ability where if I have more than, or if I have a high beast boosting the card, it gains an additional 3k power. Now since Pongle was placed into a column that a unit was in, he's going to soul charge 1. And then I'm going to call another Pongle. Since he was placed in a zone a unit was in, soul charge 1. And then we're going to play another Arcane. Now the reason I'm doing this is because Blaster Blade, when it has 4 or more rear guards with Royal Paladin in its unit name, it gains the ability to... Wow, that goes over here. It gains the ability to do an extra damage to the opponent. So, I'm going to swing with my Arcane, and then I'm going to swing. Now, normally, people swing with their Vanguard first, because if they hit a trigger unit, they can apply it to a rear guard if the opponent does not guard. But being that I have 3 in the front row, and this is the beginning of the game, I actually wanted to attack with my lower unit, because even if I hit a trigger, I want to make sure that this one hits first. So we do this one. If the opponent hits a trigger, you attack with the Vanguard in attempt to beat over it. So since I did not soul charge a trigger unit, this zone right here is 18. So you do 18 to the Vanguard, and it has 2 damage. So we do 1 check, because it is a grade 2, unless otherwise stated. And then we swing with our Arcane, which is 18 plus 3. It's 2100 damage. Now, let's say we don't want to guard with our grade 0s in hand. What I would do is I would just take the damage. So it's going to be 1, 2. So it's normally about 2 or 3 damage. So I'm actually going to do 3. So I hit a trigger unit. I'm going to give the power to the Blaster Blade. Now we draw for our turn. And we ride our Pleiades. Pleiades. Now I'm going to get my imaginary gift, Force 2. Now there's 2 Force gifts in the game right now, 2 imaginary gifts of each clan. The Force 1 gains 10, the Force 2 gains an extra damage, the Protect 1 becomes a Sentinel that you can use in hand, the Protect 2 gives a unit on the field 5k power and 10k shield, so you can intercept with them. And the Excel gets another Excel zone like every other one, except instead of giving 10, it gives 5, and when the Excel circle is placed, not the unit, the Excel circle itself, you draw 1 card, which is really good in a deck that utilizes a lot of units. Okay, so being that I don't want to play any units on the board, this is going to be the smallest unit. When this is placed, I soul charge 1. So we're actually going to go ahead and soul charge 1 now. So again, I'm going to swing with my smallest unit in an attempt to actually get somewhere. Then I'm going to swing with my Vanguard, except this time we gain twin drive. So we check 2 instead of 1. So check 1 at a time, 1, and then 2. So this one has critical. So being that, let's say my opponent didn't guard, I'm actually going to go and put the critical on the Vanguard and the power to the Akane. So this is 3 damage on hit. Now it's going to hit because it gave you drive check, and you guard before you drive check. Always remember that. So then you attack with your 3rd rear guard and attempt to save your swing, but it's less necessary. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just attempt to guard as much as possible. So I'm just going to pretend that we guarded as much as possible. So we're just going to throw all of these into this damage. And we check again. We have 1 more Blaster Blade. So let's finish off the game. So we're going to ride into 1 more Paliades. Paliades is going to soul charge 1. And the reason why this deck soul charges is because of this card. This right here, once per turn, I can soul blast 5 cards from my soul, and then all my units gain plus 15, which means when I am swinging, my entire row is gaining a minimum of 30 power before the base power, which means if I swung with this plus the 30, it would be 51 power before any triggers units, which is a lot of power. Now, we're just going to go for, pretend that we did this. Drive check, 1, drive check, 2. Critical power, swing for game. Now, the reason why I wanted to go ahead and do this over is so that you know what it would be like for a game to commence. Now, I obviously didn't explain everything in regards to the card effects. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go out of my way to record a couple of games for you guys to enjoy, see how it's played, and if you guys do want to end up playing this game, do make sure to hit up your local game store or even at Bushy Road to try and figure out if there is any local game stores for this game. It's a very fun game to try out, and honestly, I think it would be really good for you guys to actually try out something that's normally not Yu-Gi-Oh! This game is based all around luck, though sometimes it is very skillful. I've seen a lot of my games where I won just based off of luck. Where my opponent decided to guard so that it would take 2 triggers to hit, and I was the lucky motherfucker to go ahead and hit 2 triggers, and it would hit my opponent for 3 to 4 damage. Which for 6 damage is a lot. Now, I really want to say that I really, really love this deck. I really love this game. I really want people to go ahead and try it out just because it is a vision on how I enjoy games like this. However, if you find yourself not wanting to play it, I'm not going to hold it against you because some people just don't want to play something different. Other than that, I really want to thank you guys for going ahead and watching this entire video. If you did, go ahead, leave a like, comment on the video. Other than that, if you think I missed out on anything other than the premium rules, because I will not be explaining those. A, because I don't really know how they play, because I don't play premium, and B, because I don't play premium. And if I'm missing out on anything that you guys really want me to explain, do make sure that you inform me. I'm going to go over a couple of games, hopefully next Thursday and Friday, but tomorrow I'm going to go ahead and do a deck profile based on my Brufus deck because it is my favorite deck. And then I will also do a deck profile on this, which is Soul Saver Royal Paladin. Other than that, I want to thank you so much for your time today. And I hope you have a wonderful day.